Let's consider how we develop a skill, any skill. Well, I want us to look at this model. It's a skill acquisition model based on the work of Simon and Hubert Dreyfus. It isn't exactly the same. I've modified it somewhat. In this model, there are 5 levels of skill development. And if we look at the vertical axis, we could consider that as a degree of measuring a skill. And the horizontal axis is to do with relevant experience. That is, experience that helps us develop greater skill in something. And I want to illustrate this with the skill of riding a bicycle, and then come back and look at how that's relevant for us developing skills in management, such as change management or project management. So let's look at the first level. This first level is called the novice level. And when it comes to riding a bicycle, I've got fond memories of this book. Read it to my children when they were preschool, Richard Scarry's Cars and Trucks and Things That Go, which my children often called Cars and Trucks and Things What Move. Each picture, each page was a rich picture of different modes of transport, telling a story as it went through. And often the children could pick out different modes of transport, and they could pick out bicycles. Occasionally they might hesitate because they weren't quite sure whether that motorbike or moped was truly a bicycle, but they began to refine their classification of what a bicycle was. This is really at the novice level. At this point, my children had absolutely no experience of riding a bicycle. So they're beginning to develop a sense of classification, a relationship with the rules. I have a persona I use when talking about the novice. In an office context, we might think of this man, Ned the novice. He's absolutely had no experience of working in an office environment and just wants to know what's expected of him on that job. He has a relationship with the rules. To start with, everything he learns is theory, because he has got no practical experience to reference. And he can't exercise discretion. Experience hasn't given him any sense of what's more important. He can't prioritize. So the next thing that somebody asks him to do, he's likely to do it. And so what does he see around him? He sees artifacts. He sees documents, reports, emails. So he's very focused on his email inbox and marshalling and producing documents. Ned loves templates. It helps him produce good artifacts, he thinks. At the second level, it's the level of the advanced beginner. And the advanced beginner has somewhat more experience. So if we're looking at the skill of riding a bicycle, this would really be the wobbly bike level. When my children learned how to ride a bicycle without the stabilizers on, staying upright on 2 wheels, their conscious incompetence was very high. They were fully focused on staying upright. They'd find it hard to avoid trees, but they were beginning to learn how to maneuver the bicycle in terms of getting to a certain destination. But I wouldn't let them on a public highway. They were too dangerous to themselves and to other road users for that to happen. The same is true for the advanced beginner. Their conscious incompetence is high. They're very focused on the job in hand. And here's our persona. This is Becky, the advanced beginner. And Becky looks down on Ned because she's beginning to realize that there's some point to the artifacts. She has a relationship with the rules and the outputs, in other words, the delivery of what she's supposed to do. But she's got a very limited appreciation of her context. Her experience isn't broad enough yet for her to understand that there are different kinds of contexts. Everything she experiences still has a kind of normal feel to it. She values practice and process. She's becoming very process-oriented. She sees herself as a link in the chain. So sometimes she can become quite legalistic, insisting that other people present work to her in the right way for her to continue the process. But still, she hasn't really learned how to prioritize from a great deal of experience. Still quite hard for her. The third level, though, is interesting. This is the level of the proficient. In our bicycling analogy in the UK, we have got a qualification program called Bikeability, or the Road Safety Test, Road Proficiency Test. And here we see a young man going through that, going through the training and the assessment. Now, I would suggest that at this level, that young man is a safe road user. However, he is still vulnerable to threats from other road users. Possibly he is still learning to anticipate what other road users are about to do. Same is true for our persona. Here we have Paul, the proficient. Now Paul has a relationship with the outcome. Paul understands what a result is beyond just delivering something, and he's making connections with that. He's beginning to see a richer variety of contexts from his experiences, and he's also really thinking hard about what he can do to produce a better outcome. His danger is, though, that he's aware of his strengths. For example, he's beginning to make a connection with his work and his passion, but he's less aware of his weaknesses. He's still thinking in a fairly limited systemic way, fairly linear. If I do A and B, then I will get C. He's aware of his involvement in an overall process, but here's the thing, he's now developing an ability to think outside of the process and observe himself, sometimes to interrupt his mental narrative and be consciously self-aware of how he's feeling and thinking about a particular piece of work. This is a really crucial learning point, but it's not the end of him developing his skill. The next level is the level of the expert. Now, in our bicycling analogy, we have the urban cycle courier. This person has developed a high degree of symbiosis between themselves and their bicycle. They also have a highly rich internal map of their city, so that if they see any impediments to their progress, any congestion, traffic congestion, they can reroute themselves on the fly. It's just what they do. So they see a problem up ahead, and they go down a side street and navigate that way. But also they're anticipating other road users in such a way that occasionally, although they know the rules of the road, they can begin to see those micro-tell in other road users, and they can begin to anticipate accidents to the point where they're even prepared to break the rules. They might respect the rules, but if it comes to their safety, they might well, for example, mount the sidewalk to get out of a particular urgent threat. So in our office or knowledge work context, I've posited the idea of Erica, the expert. I've got the icon as a nurse or a midwife, because observing nurses and midwives who have a high order skill, they are looking for unusual patterns in different contexts. They bring a perspective. Certain things that they are focusing on are in the foreground. They prioritize them. They've got a much more systemic view of reality than Paul the proficient has. They have a high degree of tolerance for volatility, uncertainty, and some sense of complexity. As I've said, they have an ability to respect the rules, but they are prepared on occasions to break them for good reason. Erica has a high sense of flow now. She understands and is aware when she's being productive, and that's systemic appreciation. Final level is the level of the master. What's the illustration here for bicycling? Well, let's think of Tour de France. Somebody in the Tour de France is a world-class athlete. They're probably working in concert with a team. They are working at a strategic level and a tactical level. They are super fit, yes. They have this attunement not just to the bike, but to road and weather conditions. Now, the persona we've got here is Mary the master. Mary is somebody who's got a high order skill, who is actually looking at the whole system. She has a relationship with a vision. If the skill we've been looking at were, for example, project management, Martha would have now been elevated to either program director or portfolio director. She's looking right across the organization, and she values context over abstraction. She's showing a high awareness, high adaptation, intuitive grasp of situations. She's got a tolerance of complexity and ambiguity. She can recognize and pick up when certain evidence, when everybody else is making one interpretation, she's asking herself, well, what if the opposite is true? The master. Now, what we notice in this illustration, using bicycling as a skill, is that in many organizations, whatever the skill is, they put most of their investment in learning and development, in moving the novice to the advanced beginner. There are a number of reasons for this. It's easy. It's easy learning design because it's about content. Less so from the advanced beginner to the proficient, because this requires some design around practical implementation. But what we observe is that there's very little in the way of learning and development solutions to move people on from the proficient to the expert. One of the things that happens is that in organizations, people who have got the potential to become experts or masters never actually rise above that because they see very few examples of that, or people think they're good enough and move them on to the next thing. Even less so in moving the expert to the master. Although what we will discover in later videos is that's not so much a problem, because the ownership of learning and development shifts from the organization owning the learning and development of the novice and advanced beginners to the experts and the masters owning their own learning and development. But there are a couple of general observations I want to make about the skill acquisition model as I've presented it. The first is this, that we overvalue rules, knowledge and content in learning and development. We live in a rationalist age that does this constantly. It's all about what we know. It's all about the stuff. Very little about wisdom. So we undervalue emotional connection and practical experimentation. In later videos, I'll show you how we address that.